Hi there. So today we're talking about the Electoral Count Act, which is a new act being introduced into Congress. In case you don't know, an act is a law. So what this act does is it increases the number of people that can object to an election slate for the Electoral College to 1/5, which is quite a large number of people objecting to the will of the people. But it also gets into the concept of the Electoral College itself. So we already have a law or an act from 1887 dealing with the counting of electoral votes for president. A lot of that act comes out of the Civil War, and you have a lot of states that have to basically re-sign up to be in the United States. And there are instances where people from the former Confederate states are sending in fake slates of electors, and that sort of behavior also was one of the things that caused the Civil War in the first place. A lot of just like fake slates of electors showing up in DC and being like, oh no, our state votes for this person instead of this person. So there was a lot of election shenanigans back then. In one instance, South Carolina just not even turning in their Electoral College votes and just saying, hey, you know who won? Not Lincoln. We're not going to count it, but it's not Lincoln. Actually, you know what? It's this other guy. It's Breckinridge. Yeah, that's it. Sure. So a lot of this is designed to prevent this sort of shenanigans from happening. And speaking of shenanigans, to prevent some of that from happening too. That's the current 2022 Electoral Count Act is trying to prevent that. This kind of goes into the Electoral College in general, because a lot of people are kind of saying, hey, maybe we don't even need the Electoral College, and I'm going to agree with them. Whoa, before you turn this off, let's talk about maybe why it doesn't apply as well now as it did back when it was originally started in the late 1700s. In 1789, you are creating a new government, and a big part of that government involves the participation of the people, which is cool, but a lot of people back then were not considered to be people. And a lot of people back then were not even considered people that you'd want to listen to or take their vote into account. Some of these non-people included slaves. Some of the states in the Union had a significant population of slaves. Others of these not really fully citizen type people also included women. Some of these non-people that I would like to hear from voters included the poor or the illiterate. And I get it. The founding fathers are these elite people of their day. And it's an era when maybe only 1 out of every 10,000 people went to college. You know, Thomas Jefferson is sitting around going, boy, you know what I don't want people voting for? Just putting in like cheese sandwich as a president. Like, I don't want them writing in like, Garfield is a president. Like, okay, you know what? There is a president named Garfield. Bad example. But still, I understand them going, our population is either full of slaves, or we don't consider women to be people that are worthy of being able to vote yet, or, hey, these other people are way too dumb and I don't want them crashing the election. So we're going to have the Electoral College to serve as sort of a filter between what the people want and what the people should really kind of get. But now we live in an era when people of color are human beings. Spoiler alert on that, where women are people and citizens of the United States can vote, and we have a much higher literacy rate than we did in the 1790s. So a lot of the original elements of the Electoral College are antiquated and don't really align with our current lifestyle, which I would again like to point out that people like Thomas Jefferson, who believed that we should update the Constitution every 19 years so that we're not just living off of this rough draft, and who believed it so much, it's on the Jefferson Memorial. This whole like barbarous past thing he's talking about, he would now be referring to himself as a slaveholder, would say, hey, these things that are acceptable in the 1790s are not acceptable in 2022. So maybe you should update the Constitution rather than just using our version. He didn't want to be ruled by laws that existed hundreds of years before him. And he thought that we shouldn't be doing the same thing. So as long as we're kind of fiddling around with the Electoral Count Act, which is good because in the wake of that kind of stuff, I get why you don't want fake electors sent to the Capitol, and I get why you don't want to restart the Civil War because it was bad. But while we're on the topic, this whole electoral college thing, it doesn't really fit anymore. And yes, there's a lot of arguments like, oh, it gives voices to smaller states. It really doesn't. It helps people in extremely specific states get their voices heard. Because if you're running for president, you really only need to campaign in about maybe 8 states. Like if you win 5 of these, you're good. Because we all know that Alaska's going to go red, Hawaii's going to go blue. So why on earth would you ever campaign there? You already know what the outcome's going to be. You know that New York is going to go blue, and you know that Kansas is going to go red. So why on earth would you campaign there? So now you're going to ignore everybody who lives in all these other states, and you're not going to campaign there. Well, I got news for you. I live in California. 38 million people live in California, and a pretty good percentage of them are Republicans and vote Republican. So the plan is you're just going to ignore all these Republican voters and just not count their votes for president? If I was running as a Democrat, the only reason I would ever run in California is to fundraise. And if I was running as a Republican, I would not waste my time speaking to people in California. So you're just going to ignore all these people? So this concept of like, oh, the small states get more representation. They don't. It's not that I'm going to pay attention to a small state. Like Wyoming is a geographically large state, but its population is only 700,000 people. But I'm not going to campaign in Wyoming because Wyoming is going to go red. Same reason I'm not going to campaign in Rhode Island. It's going to go blue. So it doesn't give them an equal voice. It doesn't let their voice be heard. It lets these specific states have a voice. And that's it. And then they only pay attention to those voices every 4 years, or maybe every 2 years, depending on if you're really caring about the midterms or not, which PS, you should care about the midterms. But this is why everybody goes and eats corn in Iowa and pretends like, oh my God, corn is the best. And oh my gosh, corn, yes, amazing, corn. It's because Iowa is one of these swing states, and Iowa is one of these, hey, we get to do our primary first kind of states. Same thing with New Hampshire. But I have just one question. So does the president represent every person in the United States equally? Because that's really the big issue with the Electoral College. It's not that it's a state issue. Oh, it gives some states more or less power. No, since it's a winner-take-all system, it ignores anybody who has a dissenting voice for what eventually the presidency becomes. And you end up with instances where the popular vote winner loses to the person who lost the popular vote. And that's happened twice in my lifetime. And it's like, so the president only represents the states, but not the actual humans that live in the states. So by that logic, the president unequally represents people. Only certain people are represented more, which kind of defeats the purpose of America if you're thinking of it as a place where there's one person, one vote. It's like, no, you live in the right region, or you live in the right district, or you live in the right state, you pick the president. So it discourages people from voting at all, which I would kind of like people to participate in, government, because how else are you going to know what the people want or need without hearing their voices? And it's very easy to ignore the needs of the people and have an executive as the president that doesn't really reflect the wishes of the people, especially now that the people can read and more people are recognized as people. So ultimately, I think the Electoral Count Act is a good step in the right direction, but I'm kind of in the mode of you don't really need an electoral college in the first place if the president represents everyone equally. Everyone's vote for president should be equal. And any votes that you have for your own state legislatures or your own state laws, that stuff should go to the states or their districts or their local municipalities. Why would you want it to be unequal? Why would you want your representation to be unequal? Why are some of these voices louder than others? Why would you want to be just ignored by the president? Because unless you live in one of these states, there's no reason for the president to campaign where you live. There's no reason for the president to listen to you when your voice, quite honestly, doesn't really matter. Because what that's going to do is it's going to decrease the participation of the electorate. And I kind of want to live in a country where more people want to talk about what they think their government should be and want it to reflect them better. Now, look, I get that there's this perfectly valid argument that you don't want just California deciding who the president will be. Well, 38 million people live in California, and that's about 12% of the United States population. So this idea that like, oh, I don't want California picking the president. Well, California is the 5th largest economy on the earth. So I'm kind of almost okay with it, but that's not even the thing I'm arguing. Since our current system has a winner-take-all kind of setup with the Electoral College, in that California, when it goes blue, and it's going to go blue, when it does, all 55 votes go into the Electoral College, and so it completely ignores everybody that voted Republican in California, and those numbers look like this. So we're cool with ignoring all these people's votes? And again, it's the argument of, well, does the president equally represent each person in the United States, or does the president not equally represent each person in the United States? But I often find that the counter argument to this is, well, I don't want California or New York or Texas just deciding all the votes. You don't want this massive economy where a significant portion of the people in the United States live making important decisions about what to do with your taxes and ignoring this giant swath of Republicans that live there? Just have Ohio do it then, I guess? Again, why not just one person, one vote? Now, there is an argument that you could make that would say, hey, well, that means that who's ever running for office is probably going to campaign only in major cities. And since most of those major cities are going to go blue, why would you do that? Wouldn't you just then campaign and get your message out to as many people as possible because the people are voting and you're the president, you represent the people, not districts in various states, right? So wouldn't the president just try to appeal to as many people as possible to represent the majority of Americans? Right? I know that's not our current system, but it could be. Now, I'm also very aware that the arguments for getting rid of the Electoral College mostly come from one side of the aisle, and the arguments for keeping the Electoral College mostly come from the other side of the political aisle, because it's almost like there is an imbalance in the number of people on this side as opposed to the number of people on this side. But imagine how much more accurately we could figure that out if we didn't have the Electoral College and it actually encouraged people to vote. Because the biggest number of people isn't this side or this side, it's this part in terms of voting, in that these people don't vote. So I would like these people to feel like they have more of a voice, because right now, what's the motivation to take off of work and not get paid and stand in a giant line? Well, if you live in Tennessee, it's going to go Republican. If you live in Washington State, it's going to go Democratic. So why would you bother voting? I would like to live in a society where there is representative government that represents the people. And I think that the president of the United States should represent the people, not various voting districts. No, but then we'd have to do a constitutional amendment. Yeah, we've done that like a bunch of times. There's a bunch of amendments. The Bill of Rights was a constitutional amendment. Freedom of speech was not originally in the Constitution. So we had to add that. A heads up. Like, it's not that we can't do it. Oh, no, we can't do it. Yeah, we know we absolutely can. We probably should. Well, I mean, if the president doesn't represent the wishes of the majority, then if the president wants to do something like an executive action or wants to, I don't know, lead, then won't the majority of people not want that because they didn't vote for that person? Right? Because they don't feel represented? Because quite honestly, they're not. But yes, as long as we have the Electoral College, I would at least like the representatives in the Electoral College to be the actual representatives and not attempt to defraud the people of the United States with their fake electors. And it would be really nice if that didn't cause another civil war. I'm on team, let's not have a civil war and let's have an actual representative democracy that reflects the electorate. Good times.